I'm Stephanie Rozzo. Welcome to Nature Sketch Crate's Pima Pineapple Cactus step-by-step painting instructions video. In this video, I'll be showing you how to paint the Pima Pineapple Cactus using Nature Sketch Crate's step-by-step painting instructions. First, collect all your materials and make sure they're ready to go. Remember, this is just a sketch. Take your time and don't worry too much if you think you may have made a mistake. Let's get started. Step 1, transfer the image to the watercolor paper. Tape part of the transfer image to the back of the watercolor paper. And then place the graphic transfer paper dark side down, light side up, on top of the watercolor paper and press down, gently press it down flat. And then you can start transferring. When you put the tape down, make sure you don't put it over any of the lines that you plan on transferring to your watercolor paper. I'm going to start transferring this little line here for this spine. Don't worry about being too exact. If it's not exactly the same, it's really not a big deal. This is just a sketch. Check that first line you make. Make sure it's actually transferring and that it's transferring kind of a medium color. If you make it a little too dark, it's okay. Just make sure you can actually see it because you'll be using those lines. Press it back down and then go through and just draw over all of the lines to transfer them. Take your time, put on a podcast, some music or an audiobook, whatever helps you relax, and transfer all of those lines. If you get interrupted at any point and you have to stop, don't worry, you can set this to the side and then come back to it whenever you have more time. You can check every once in a while to see if those lines have transferred and if you've got all of the lines in a certain section. I always end up missing just a few, so it's good to check while working and then also at the end before you take the transfer paper off. Again, there are a lot of lines, so flipping this up and down to figure out which lines you missed helps a lot. And if you don't get all of the lines transferred, it's totally fine. It's just a sketch, it doesn't need to be perfect. And this is just for fun. It'll still look great at the end, either way. But it is helpful to have most of the lines. I'm going to go ahead and transfer the common name and the scientific name by drawing over it. Outline the common name. Just draw over the scientific name. I'm not going to transfer these lines for the whole punch, but you can always add those later if you want, or I can add those later to mine if I decide to add that. You remove the transfer paper and save it for later. I'm going to gently remove the tape from the back of the watercolor paper. then I'm going to remove my tape from my transfer image. It has a little bit of paper on it, so I'm not going to save it. I'm going to take my kneaded eraser and make sure I have a clear spot, so it's light gray rather than a black area. And I'm going to go ahead and remove any of these unwanted marks. There's a few on this time. And you can lighten marks this time as well. I think I like how dark these lines are, so I'm going to leave it like that. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to step 2. Step 2, paint the wettest, lightest Pima yellow and brown. So first mix the Pima yellow. You need 1 drop of the 1H Hansa yellow light. Make sure to shake that up to mix in all the paint pigment that may have settled to the bottom. You can use more than 1 drop if you want, but I think 1 drop is all you really need. Just take your water brush or your regular paintbrush and add some water, just a little bit to that in your palette. Mix it in. Take a little bit of that to the side and add a little bit more water. We're going to use a really wet, light, not very concentrated color. And we're going to add that to all the flower blooms. So I'm going to go ahead and dab that off onto my towel. Check it on my paper. It's really light, maybe just a little bit more color. So I'll take a little bit of the color, add it in, dab it on my towel, and test it again on my paper. I think that looks better. It's still very light and wet, but has a little bit more of a concentration, similar to my image in step 2. And I'm just going to take that color and add it over the entire space of those flowers. And if you need to, you can refer to your final reference image as well as your image in step 2. And whenever you need to, you can pick up a little bit more paint, dab it on your towel so you don't have too much water going on to your paper. You don't want it to buckle or be too light when you apply it. You only need a little bit of actual paint. And once you're done with that, I'm going to go ahead and mix the Pima brown after you clean your brush off on your towel. The Pima brown is 5 drops of the Hansa yellow light, mixed it up a little bit. One, 2, 3, 4, 5. And 1 drop of the 24H burnt umber. What? Mix that in with a little bit of water. I'm going to use, again, a very wet, not very concentrated color. So you add a bunch of water to it in your palette. So I took a little bit to the side so I can keep some of that more concentrated. And add lots of water to it. Dab it off on my towel and test it on my test paper. And that still looks a little bit concentrated, so I'll pull a little bit more to the side. So I don't have to add too much water. Dab it off on my towel and test it again. I think that looks good. So I'm just going to add that to all of the spines. And in order to get a nice fine tip, just roll your brush on your towel. And that'll give you a good tip. My brush is a little bent, and that's okay. you need more paint at any time, just pick up a little bit more, dab it on your towel so you don't have too much. I think I added that to all the spines. So I'm going to let this dry and move on to step 3. Step 3, paint the wettest, lightest Pima green. First, mix the Pima green, 2 drops of the 8H ultramarine, 1, 2, 1 drop of the 27H vermilion hue, and 22 drops of the 1H Hansa yellow light. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Mix all of that together. I'm not really adding any water yet. And I'm going to use the lighter, wetter, less concentrated color. So once I mix that up, it's well mixed, I'm going to take a little bit, just some on my brush already, to a blank space on my palette and add some water to it. And just kind of mix it around to get that really light, less concentrated color. And make sure it's right. I'll dab it off onto my towel and test it on my test paper here. There's a little bit of fuzz on the end of my brush. I'll pull that off. Looks pretty good to me. Maybe a little on the light side, so I'm gonna add a little bit more, just a tiny bit. Dab it on my towel and add it. You can test it again on your test strip if you want to. And I'll just carefully add it to all these cactus areas as I see. It's a little bit too wet, so dab it off onto my towel and then move that more watery color around now that I have less on my brush. So working in these small spaces, it's better to not have too much paint or too much water on my brush. That way I have a little more control, so dab it off pretty well on that towel. Let's work into these small places and just fill it in with a little bit of paint in each spot. Just looking at my reference image in step 3, and you can also look at your final reference image if it helps, and fill those all in. Again, working left to right, top to bottom to prevent smudging, and using your transfer image paper to protect your watercolor paper from any smudges from your hand whenever needed. And if you think maybe you put some paint in the wrong spot, that's okay. This is just a sketch. It's still gonna look great. Once you're finished adding all of the Pima green to the cactus, go ahead and clean off your brush and let this dry and move on to step 4. Step 4, paint in the wet light Pima orange. So first mix the Pima orange with 22 drops of Hansa yellow light and 1 drop of the 27H vermilion hue. And mix that up. Take a little bit to the side and add some water to it, clean space on your palette. Going to be using the wet light, not super wet light, but wet light, so it still has some concentration. Dab it onto my towel and test it on my paper. That looks pretty good. It looks like color G on my step-by-step. And I'm going to add it onto the spines and flowers as you see in step 4. I'm going to add it kind of to the edges of the petals here. And just like little lines coming down. Just adding a little bit more dimension to those petals. And I'm going to add it to the filaments, which are part of the stamen, this longer part. And continue to add at all these edges of the petals. I need to add it to all of them. I missed a line right there, which is fine. I can add it in later, or just leave it out. And then I've added it to the flowers. I'm going to pick up a little bit more. My palette is kind of merged here. That's fine. Probably push some of that paint to the side, take some of it and bring it back down to this area here and check it again and make sure it's the right color. Dab it off and check it again. It looks really a little too concentrated, so I'm going to add a little bit more water. Sometimes that happens, and that's okay. It hasn't really mixed with the extra Hansa yellow light. That looks good now. I'm going to dab it on my towel and then add it to the spines. I'm going to add it to the bottom part of the spines, leaving the tips a lighter color. So starting by the aerial, the center white area, and moving out towards the tip of the spine. You can work kind of at the end, almost to the tip, and then go down towards the aerial if you like to. You see me doing that. Whatever's most comfortable for you. And if you miss some, it's totally fine. That looks pretty good to me. So I am going to clean off my brush, let this dry, and move on to step 5. Step 5, paint the driest, darkest Pima yellow. So in my palette, the yellow merged with the orange. So I'm just going to get a little bit more, another drop of the Hansa yellow light. Let's place it in the corner here. I'm going to be using the most concentrated color of Pima Yellow B. So not a lot of water added or any at all. So I'm just going to take a little bit of that, test it on my paper. Maybe add just a little bit of water, that seems really dark. Test it out again. Looks good. Dab it off onto my towel and add it to the flowers. So I'm going to go ahead and add it to the anthers in the center here, and the stigmas as well, which is kind of hard to differentiate in my image right now. Pick up a little bit more of that paint and dab it off on my towel. And I'm going to add it to the petals, and I don't want to add it to the entire petal, more the inside center petals. So I'm kind of putting a line down. I don't want to do the tips. Keep those tips a little bit on the lighter side as well. And you don't have to be really exact with this, just kind of add it in. But make sure to leave some areas a little bit lighter to add some contrast and dimension to your painting. And when you're done, you can just clean your brush off on your towel and move on to step 6. Step 6, paint in Pima green and purple. So I'm going to be using a drier, more concentrated Pima green, F. Pick up a little bit of the color. We'll be using a little bit more of a concentrated, drier, darker Pima green, F. So pick up a little bit of that color, dab it off onto your towel, and test it on your test strip. And pick up a little bit more and dab it off because I like that color. And I'm going to add it to the inner edges of these tubercles. And mine's a little dark. I'm going to dab it off on my towel, adding some water to that, to my brush, and then reapply it to move some of that around a little bit. Basically adding a little bit of shading. And I think I even want to add a little bit of a gradient here. I'm going to dab off my brush on my towel, and then that clean damp brush, move it into that paint that I just added here, and just move it towards the edges that are a little bit lighter. Same with this area here. You can pick up a little bit more and add it again to these edges. This one's a little bit lighter this time. Dab it on my towel and then kind of create a little bit of a gradient there. And you can do that in all these little spaces wherever needed. So some of the spaces are just dark and some have a little bit of a gradient. So you can use that technique to create that little bit of a gradient in there if you like. So right here again, I'm going to add the darker color in the dark spaces up to the spine here and down at the bottom of this tubercle. And I'm going to dab off my brush, adding some water on my towel, and then kind of just paint over those edges a little bit with that clean damp brush, kind of pulling that paint up to the lighter areas. And that creates a natural little gradient, but still a nice dramatic dark color here. just go throughout and add those gradients and the dark areas, just working from one space to another, looking at the areas between the spines and the lines as well. And feel free to add a little bit more of that dark color in areas wherever needed. So these spaces are a little lighter, so I'm just going to add a little bit more. You can do that when it's wet, or you can wait till it's dry. If it's wet, it'll just spread a little bit more. If it's dry, it'll sit a little bit more of a lined area. This is a really good exercise, practicing making those gradients, because you're working in these little spots for each one. So you get lots and lots of practice. And as you can see, I'm not being really exact. I'm just adding some paint and not being too worried about how it lands or the exact texture of that paint once it dries. It's a sketch, and those variations make it more fun. Now I'm going to go ahead and mix the Pima purple, and you can add more of this green color if you want, but I like where it's at. You may want to let it dry in between to darken it up a little bit more, or you can put it on when it's wet and it'll just add a little bit more of those textures like you can see right there. So mixing the Pima purple, I want 1 drop of the ultramarine red violet. Shake that up. And 1 drop of the 27H vermilion hue. Make sure you have a clean brush. Add some water while you mix this up a little bit. And we're going to use a lighter, wetter, less concentrated color first. So I'm going to add some water to that, to the side with on my palette. So I have a little bit of paint on my brush, just adding some water to it over here. Dabbing it off on my towel and testing it on my paper before adding it to my painting. Dabbing on my towel after I pick some more up and adding it to the flower petal tips. So just kind of, whoops, a little bit too much water. So we'll pick that back up. It's okay. Some of them can be more concentrated, a little darker. And I'm just adding it to the tips, as you can see in the final reference image. I don't add all of them, just for a little bit of variation. Depending on how the light would hit, you may not see all the pink quite as vibrant. But they definitely have a little pink, and still a bit more concentrated than my final reference image, but I'm liking it, so I'm going to go with it this time. This is my sketch, and it's going to be probably a little bit different every time I do it, and that is just fine. I added a lot more than my final reference image. That's just what it's going to look like this time. I'm going to clean off my brush on my towel, and then we're going to use the same color, the Pima Purple, but more of a drier, darker, concentrated color. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of that and dab it on my towel, test it on my test strip, and I'm going to add it just to some of the spines. So it's kind of like the central part of the spine. You can see it in your step 6 image, but also on your final reference image here a little bit better. So just kind of a little bit too much, and dab it off on my towel. It's a little light. Sometimes you have to play around with a little bit more, add a little more water to this. Dab it on my towel. It's pretty good now. Add it in there. And I'm not adding it to those central spines, but the spines going around the center. And it's hard to see in this step 6 image, but you can see it in your final reference image really well. And it doesn't need to be real exact, just a little bit to the center of those spines. And I like how that looks, so I am going to let this dry and then move on to step 7. Step 7, add ink lines. You want to use the 005 black micron to add the ink lines to outline the plants again, so basically redraw the transfer image lines. You can use your transfer image and your final reference image and 7A to refer to for where to add those lines. Also make sure to write over the text outline the common name and write in the scientific name. So you can just go through and add those lines. Use the 01 black micron to thicken some of the lines as seen in the final image provided in 7A, and also write in the scientific name to thicken it up as well. Now I'm going to use the 08 black micron to write in and fill in the common name and thicken the rest of the lines. And refer to your image, it's your final reference image, and 7B. You can always go back and add more lines and more paint. Just make sure you let it dry between. I like how this looks, so we're done. Great job. You have created a painting that's unique to you. Next, you have some options of what to do with this painting when you're done with it. You can punch holes in it and add it to your sketchbook. You can frame it, display it around your house, maybe gift it to a friend, send as a postcard. Also, make sure to share it on our Facebook fan art page. Check out the Nature Sketch Crate website to sign up for our newsletter for regular updates and to shop for future crates. Thank you for joining me. I hope you had fun and had a chance to relax a little. If you like this video, please click like to like it and subscribe to this channel.